Welcome to the podcast Killer Content with Emma and Anne, the weekly rundown for true crime fans who can't get enough of all things crim. From the biggest crime stories making headlines to the latest must-watch documentaries and chilling murder mysteries, we've got you covered. Welcome to this week's episode of Killer Content. I'm Emma and this is Anne, and on today's episode we're going to update you on some developments in the Khandalyce Pearce case, aka that's the little girl whose body was found in a suitcase in 2015. Also an update on the Tamika Chester case, including some details that have not hit the mainstream media. And we're also discussing a very interesting case of a former teacher who in the 70s sexually abused some of her students, and it really highlights how our views have changed towards males being sexually assaulted.
Today, all things podcasts and movies, etc. It's the American Murder, Gabby Petito story on Netflix. It's a great podcast called The Crossbow Killers, and it is the new show on Netflix called The Beast in Me.
But first let's talk about the Sydney Writers' Festival event that we went to last week. We went and listened to the authors of the book The Mushroom Tapes, Helen Garner, Chloe Hooper and Laura Krasnostein. They had a great chat on stage about the mushroom trial. But before we get into it, Anne and I vox popped some people outside about the case, and this is what they had to say. So what fascinated you about the mushroom cook trial?
I think the rarity of the method, the fascination with what could she possibly have been thinking. I must say during the trial I thought that reasonable doubt might have been found to be there, but things that have come to light subsequent to our following of the trial, which wasn't the full trial, have made me understand why that might not be the case.
Why do you think she wanted to kill the in-laws and even the aunt?
I don't know, and I don't know. Well, maybe she just hated the whole family and chose not to show it.
Do you normally follow crime cases, or was this a one-off?
This was a particular one-off because it was so extensively covered in real time.
So why did you end up coming? What are you expecting tonight?
Helen Garner to be on fire, because she's my favourite.
What fascinated you about the trial?
I mean, the beef Wellington, come on.
You're the second person that said that, the murder weapon.
The different coloured plate. I mean, every day there was something new. I think in particular in our group chat, I think the main thing was wearing white pants when you had severe diarrhea and suggesting that you would travel for an hour in the car while doing so. Might have been a bit sus.
Okay, so was there a particular piece of evidence that really sealed it for you, or was it the cumulative?
I think the cumulative, but then when I just finished the book yesterday, and I didn't realise, I had no idea about the multiple previous attempts on her husband's life. I had no idea.
No, I don't think there really is a big motive. I think she just didn't like the circumstance and decided to take extreme action.
I think she's pretty messed up, and I think she's probably conflated a number of things in her own head and wrap them up into a bit of a I'm a victim and I'm going to take control and do something.
Do you think she's going to get the money back from her in-laws that she loaned them?
I think that's a hard no on that one. No.
Love Killer Content. You guys rock. I've always been fascinated with true crime, but especially when, I know it sounds really bad, but when a female does it. It captivated the whole of Australia, really. So I just jumped on the bandwagon.
So do you think she's guilty?
Totally. She probably didn't get a fair trial.
So why do you think that?
I just think because I heard about the jury and all that were in the court stayed in the same place with the prosecutor and all that. So I just think that's a bit, motive, she was just angry. I think she just wanted to get back at her husband. The dehydrator, that was my biggest thing, the dehydrator. There's going to be T-shirts made up, the dehydrator.
You're saying that she wanted to get rid of the estranged husband, but why kill the in-laws and the...
That's how you get back at him.
So are you hoping to see an appeal?
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
Now, And what did you think of the event? Did you learn anything new apart from the fact that you and Chloe Hooper are doppelgangers?
I know. It was really weird seeing myself up on stage. But other than that, look, I thought it was really, really good. I mean, I'm slightly biased. I've mentioned, I think, before that I absolutely love Helen Garner, and I was just excited to see her up on stage. I did. You know, what I thought was really interesting was they're three women with very different views of the world, I would say. I mean, they obviously have... they're obviously very bright. They're obviously great writers. But I thought what was really interesting was their take on the case from sort of humanistic. It was almost their sort of take on the human side of the case. They're not voyeurs. They weren't there just for the gory details, although of course they did witness those. But I thought their views on the people involved with the case was really interesting. And Helen Garner is known, obviously, has been fascinated by the law, and she had some really interesting observations. But I thought it was really, really good. And Fran Kelly did an amazing job hosting it. What did you think?
I agree about Fran Kelly. She really kept it moving on. There was a couple of things that really stood out for me. One of the ladies mentioned that why we were so fascinated or even flippant or so voyeuristic about it was that the victims were old. They weren't young.
Oh,
so
yes.
I think they were basically telling us that we're a bit more, I don't know, not as empathetic about the victims as we should have been. And they talked about how, you know, how these people in their community had served them so well and were really, you know, really nice and kind-hearted.
Yes.
The second thing that I found really interesting was they talked about the time when Erin Patterson took the stand. It was unexpected. And in fact, Chloe and Laura were in Melbourne listening to the trial through sort of a live cam, just listening, and then they had to rush into the Melbourne Supreme Court so they could see her on video link. But Helen Garner was down in Morwell on that day.
Yes.
But their comments on the personality of Erin was it was actually really interesting.
Yes, they said she was a bit of a, well, is smart ass the right word for it? But she was obviously bright, but didn't seem to read the room and came across a bit arrogant, I think they were saying. But I don't know whether we mentioned this last time. The premise of the book is that these three women spent many hours driving to and from Morwell, where the court was, and they talked on the way there and way back, and they recorded all their conversations, and apparently there was thousands of hours, which they've distilled down to a book. So I'm really looking forward to getting a copy of the book. I should have bought one on the night and got it signed. And we can then maybe report back on how the book is.
Well, we were too busy standing in the long line for the bar, but that's a whole other story.
The rosé was very good. Anyway.
Let's kick off with the crime for today. First is the Khandalyce Pearce update. And convicted double murderer Daniel Holden, who's now 51, has lodged an appeal in the New South Wales Supreme Court arguing that 2 life sentences he received for the horrific murders of Carly Pearce Stevenson and her 2-year-old daughter Khandalyce Pearce are manifestly excessive. The appeal, set down for a 2-hour hearing on March 18 next year, comes 7 years after the public gallery famously erupted into applause as Holden was handed 2 full-term life sentences with no possibility of release. Now, the murders of Carly and Khandalyce were not only brutal, but they were grotesquely staged and concealed, and it took police a number of years to solve them. I'll just give you a quick overview of the crime because it has been a few years. So Carly, who was then 20 years old, was murdered in Belanglo State Forest, an area already notorious for serial killers. Ivan Milat, and Holden violently killed and sexually assaulted her before leaving her half-naked body among the trees. The court heard he saw her as just flesh with a life that could be extinguished for his vile pleasure. And then 4 days later, apparently this is what the police have worked out, 2-year-old Khandalyce was described as completely defenceless when she was killed, and Holden admitted he tried or intended to sexually assault her. He stuffed a dishcloth into her mouth, wrapped a nappy around her head and placed her body into a suitcase. He then dumped the suitcase beside a highway in South Australia. Khandalyce's remains were discovered in 2015 inside that suitcase, and that find eventually led police to identify her mother as the woman whose remains had been found in Belanglo in 2010. Now, Anne, do you remember the case at the time?
I do, and if you don't quite recall it, the thing that struck me when I was looking into it again was the photo of the little girl. I think that was shown on news a lot, and it really came flooding back to me because I remember the terrible circumstances of her death and the thought that there were 4 days between when her mother was killed and when she was killed just was the most dreadful thing. So yes, I do.
Now, obviously, Daniel's made this appeal, and he's arguing that Justice Robert Horn, the judge at the time, failed to properly account for his guilty plea, and also did not give enough weight to his subjective factors, and also wrongly rejected a forensic psychiatrist's assessment that was partially based on Holden's own later discredited version of events. He also complains that his attempt to withdraw his guilty plea on the morning of sentencing was not given proper consideration.
That sounds a bit contradictory. So he wants a lighter sentence because he was going to plead guilty, but actually he wanted to withdraw his guilty plea. That's very interesting, isn't it? Anyway, sorry.
I think it's called covering all bases.
Covering all bases. I'm guilty and I'm not guilty. Which one serves me better?
But now, however, the judge at the time had been blunt about his crimes, that they were so appallingly depraved and heinous that no subjective factor could mitigate his culpability or justify anything less than life imprisonment.
Yes, he had a long history of violence and manipulation, which played a central role in his sentencing. He was a serial domestic abuser, repeatedly violent to former partners. He had a well-documented pattern of sex violence, coercive control and cruelty. He was known for sadistic behaviour and showed escalating risk profile before the murders. He used Carly's identity after the killings, draining her bank accounts, using her phone and impersonating her online for years, prolonging the deception and delaying the discovery. So people thought, because her bank accounts were being used, that she may well still have been alive, but actually it was him. Justice Holm found he had zero remorse, calling his conduct sadistic, callous and entirely self-serving. The Crown is expected to strongly oppose any reduction given the extreme brutality and sexual elements and the targeted killing of a child.
It's an interesting case. I mean, at the time when they found the bodies and worked out that he was a suspect, he was actually in Cessnock jail.
Oh,
I actually, just by absolute chance, a couple of weeks ago on Channel 9, they have these short sort of crime shows, 45 minutes. It's a bit like a podcast on TV. Good for when you're cooking dinner. But
it's like your version of Australian Story.
Well, it is, and I just happened to look through and I thought, the Khandalyce case, and recommend having a watch because there was a lot about the case that I did not know. So, but my view is that he should get life imprisonment. Now, next we have the Tamika Chester case, and this year Tamika Chester, who's a former Beauty and the Geek contestant, appeared in the headlines when she was charged with the alleged murder of her partner, 39-year-old Julian Story, in Port Lincoln, South Australia. And just one of the reasons why this stayed in the headlines for so long was the fact that he'd been decapitated, and it took over a month for the police to find the head.
Oh, good Lord.
And there were also rumours flying around that she also dismembered other parts of the body as well. So on the 19th of June 2025, neighbours noticed smoke coming from Chester's unit in Port Lincoln, and when a neighbour, concerned and confused, entered through the back door to check if anyone was inside, they found like smouldering debris in the bathroom. Fire crews and police arrived, and then they obviously made the horrifying discovery with the burnt and disfigured human remains on the floor. Then they found Tamika outside in a catatonic and unresponsive state. She was quickly charged with murder and interfering with human remains, but mental health is going to be pretty central to this legal process. So she was denied bail, but she was transferred to a state forensic mental health facility. It's called James Nash House. But last week she hit the headlines again when it was reported she was pregnant in custody, and the baby's apparently due early next year. And what was mildly amusing, if there's anything mildly amusing about this case, was that the South Australian Health Minister had to make a statement to the media about her being pregnant in custody. Now, why would a minister need to come out and
it's interesting,
and
isn't
say
it?
something?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, Emma? Because I imagine that it may have shone a light on a mental health facility being somewhere where you could go and knock someone up, or either from inside or from outside. So I imagine for the system and for the benefit of those that work in the facility, he had to come out and clarify that it did not happen. She did not conceive inside the facility.
No, they do think that the baby is Julian Story's, which gets me on to my next bit. So there's been a bit more information about this out via social media. A TikToker called Clarity and Chaos, who actually does a bit of true crime. I think she lives in Port Lincoln because she always has the skinny on when there's crime going on down there. I mean, that's another podcast in itself about how much crime goes on in Port Lincoln. But she was saying that there's a woman that was having an affair with Julian, and she was also pregnant. And even though this lady has been, and everyone's kind of knew that Tamika was pregnant then as well. And the lady the other woman who's pregnant, saying the father is unknown. But this Chaos in Clarity said, we all know.
Interesting.
And as I said, I wouldn't be taking one TikToker's view, but she has been on the money on other crimes. So, going into speculation mode. And could this be the motive for the
murder? Do you think
murder?
a lover scorned, whatever? I don't. Yeah. Look, I mean, it's a bit scurrilous, but yes, I mean, if she was pregnant to him and then he was having an affair and got someone else knocked up, could it have caused such a rage that she went for him in the kitchen and burnt his body and then cut his head off? I don't know.
It would have flipped a big switch, didn't it?
Well, Emma, to be honest with you, and I think it's amusing that Port Lincoln has so much crime.
I've got another mole of mine who emailed me about it, was saying that the rumours that she was showing signs of pregnancy when she arrived at James Nash House, and she is under 24/7 surveillance there. And also what they'll be doing is evaluating her on whether she is fit to stand trial. So in our next story, this one is a bit of a woman in male field story, to be honest, which is about a former Sydney teacher, Helga Lamb. It's been found that she cannot be financially held liable for engaging in sexual activity with 4 male students, which occurred in the late 70s, after a judge found she could not have reasonably foreseen that her conduct would cause them harm under the standards of the time. So the background to this case is 4 men alleged that Lamb, their former high school teacher, sexually abused them between the ages of 13 and 16 in the late 1970s. Now, Lamb always denied wrongdoing. Now, a criminal prosecution collapsed in 2024 when the New South Wales Court of Criminal Appeal ruled that the historical offence of indecent assault upon a male did not apply to women, as in when a woman was doing it. So it made the prosecution impossible. So then the complainants instead sued the state of New South Wales, which admitted liability, and they settled for $2.5 million in 2023. Now, the state has then sought to recover part of that money from Lamb, arguing she should contribute financially as the person responsible for that civil wrongdoing. Now, the court came down with its judgment last week, and Justice Ian Harrison found he was comfortably satisfied that Lamb did engage in sexual contact with all 4 students, accepting their evidence to the civil standard. However, the legal question was whether Lamb should have known her behaviour would cause psychiatric harm. So he concluded, although Lamb likely knew that her conduct was morally wrong, she could not, by the standards of the late 1970s, be expected to foresee the mental harm such behaviour could cause. And obviously there's been modern understanding of child abuse through the Royal Commission that happened a few years ago. And that thinking didn't, they didn't have that thinking at the time. So therefore she was found she was not negligent and therefore not liable. Now, there's been issues about school leadership failure. 2 boys had reported Lamb's behaviour to the headmaster in the 1970s, and he allegedly dismissed them immediately and called them liars.
Dreadful.
And also, what was interesting too, Lamb's lawyers questioned the men's motivations, suggesting financial incentives and shared stories, something that's used in cases against female victims as well. What do you think? And do you think there's definitely more awareness around men being victims of sexual assault these days, and that it can have a long-term impact?
Oh, absolutely. And I think we have touched on some of this before, but absolutely. And I found this fascinating. I had to reread all the evidence a number of times because it made no sense to me. And we have obviously heard in the past where people couldn't be tried under old laws and things, but this one was fascinating. Because, so to answer your question, yes, I do definitely think I think we better understand all sexual assault that occurs now, but definitely against boys. We've discussed this before, I'm sure, but, as the mother of a 16-year-old, you're the mother of a 17-year-old, I can only imagine the harm that unwanted sexual assault would have on them, regardless of whether it was by a woman or a man, it would have to have an effect on their future. And it's interesting to think that in the 70s, one, they didn't think women were capable of sexual assault of a boy, but two, that the law didn't even allow for it is quite extraordinary. But I do think I would hope to think, and there'll be people on this watching this podcast who may have different experiences, and I apologise, but I do think that at least we're much more aware these days of the fact that sexual assault against a boy or a girl can cause long-term harm.
Yes, and then there's some awful stories from the 70s about teachers and students. But the other thing is too, I agree, I think when people have definitely changed their view around this, but also on my TikTok, there's been a couple of cases that I've covered with female teachers being charged with sexual assault. There's still men that come in and go, oh, isn't he lucky, making those flippant sort of marks. So I think, in my mind, I think we've still got a little way to go on this.
Absolutely. Okay, so now we're going to talk about shows and podcasts. So The American Murder, Gabby Petito is a 3-episode true crime docuseries released on Netflix earlier this year in February. It revisits the 2021 tragic case of Gabrielle Petito, known as Gabby, a 22-year-old travel vlogger who embarked on a cross-country van life road trip with her fiancé Brian Laundrie. The couple's van trip lifestyle, which they documented on social media, and was an image of a kind of idealised journey, but it concealed some very underlying tensions. And they were doing this amazing trip. The scenery in this documentary is just beautiful through Utah and all these amazing mountains. But what happened was they were in Moab in Utah, and a witness actually saw an altercation in the street between the two of them, with him allegedly hitting her. They drove off, but police actually pulled them over on the road. And if you've been paying attention to this, you may have seen this footage where a very distraught Gabby, very shortly before she died, was talking to police. That part, as a mother, was heartbreaking, because you know what she wanted to do? Call her mum. And that made me very sad. And you also see the mother, so you see the other side of it. Anyway, police, I suspect, let Gabby down. Gabby then disappeared. Her parents had not heard from her for some time, and that did trigger a missing persons search eventually. Sadly, with her remains being discovered, this is all very public, and I'm sure you have heard through this. What's really interesting is looking into her boyfriend's actions at the time. He came home, drove the van home. He originally said he'd flown home. The parents immediately got lawyers on the books. Police were very suspicious very early on, and the case moved quite quickly. But I won't go into much more of it, because I think actually how it unravelled was really interesting. It's a sad show. It's a sad documentary, because I think, again, we've discussed this before, it shows women not being believed in domestic violence situations. It shows how with enough money, I suspect in the US, if you hire the right lawyer, you're probably, you're on your way of getting away with this. But, really it is just a tragic story of, and also don't believe everything you see on travel vlogs, for sure. What do you think, Emma?
I thought there was a lot of media about this when Gabby Petito, and I'm not going to call her Gabby Petito, which I keep on calling her, disappeared, and there was that thing about attractive white woman goes missing and
yes.
gets far more attention. But the documentary really does go into detail, and I learned quite a few new things, so I'd highly recommend it.
Yes.
It also focuses on the victim, like it's very victim focused rather than about the perpetrator, which is very different from, say, the Erin Patterson documentary, which is very focused on the perp. Again, as you said, focuses on, you can sort of see coercive control, the early warning signs.
Yes. And
as you said, the police misreading the signs. Gabby's hysterical, Brian's calm and methodical when it comes to the police.
Yes.
And they're trying to be quite a little bit condescending
yes.
Towards her as well. But one of the things that really fascinated me was Brian's parents.
Oh.
He came home to their house, and obviously they pulled down the shutters in a number of ways. Would you do that for your child, or would you at least make them talk to police? He never spoke to police, I don't think.
I would like to think, given those parents knew the parents of the dead girl. So, they'd been dating for quite a long time. They were familiar with each other. They may have even at one point known each other quite well. I would like to think that I'm the sort of person that would make my son talk to the police. I'm assuming, and there was a bit of a throwaway line somewhere, I can't remember where it was, where I think maybe it was even the parents, I can't remember now, but they didn't just hire a, everyday lawyer. They retained a lawyer for $35,000, I think, which the suggestion was that's a lawyer you get when you need to get off on a murder charge. So I suspect they knew what he'd done. I think they put their desire to keep him out of jail way ahead of any concern about the victim and her family. Yeah, no, I'd like to think I wouldn't. Would you?
I'd like to think I wouldn't. I mean, I'd definitely hire lawyers. For them. That's. I'm not going to say I wouldn't.
No.
I definitely would hire lawyers, but I would probably make them go talk to the police with the lawyer there.
Yes.
And at least try and unravel it. I mean, there's your legal rights, I suppose, and then there's the ethical.
Yes, that's true.
Ethics and morality.
One of the things I found fascinating with this documentary, and it happens a lot with the more recent documentaries, is how much footage there is. So there was the police cameras, and of course Gabby only actually got to put together one full episode of her travel vlog.
Oh, right.
She was vlogging, but she was doing a travel YouTube series.
Yep.
And she only got to put together one full episode, and it was I didn't watch the whole thing, but what was so fascinating was that they were overlaying the parents being, so the mother and father are divorced. They're both recoupled, they get on very well, and they both were interviewed. And as they were talking, they were able to show footage of Gabby and her then partner in real time, because they videoed everything. And I found that, I think there's more modern documentaries where there is so much footage of everything now is, on one hand, really helpful, but also incredibly sad. Anyway, on to the next thing. So the next one is the Crossbow Killer. Now this one I literally just was looking for kind of a new podcast, and it popped up. It's a BBC podcast, and I do really like the BBC ones. It's called The Crossbow Killer, and it's narrated by a guy called I think his name is Mick Parry, Welsh, with a narration by Tim Hinman. And it is, so it's set in Wales, and it's described often as one of Britain's most baffling and brutal cases, a murder with no clear motive carried out in a remote rural location. I won't go into too much detail because I think that some of the discoveries you make during the podcast are quite interesting, but I will say, obviously there's a victim, there's always a victim in a podcast, but a fellow called Gerald Corrigan, he was 74 years old, he was a retired photography lecturer, had moved from, I think, the UK from England and to the coast of Anglesey in North Wales for a quiet life. The interesting thing was that he made almost no friends. He had a partner who he was the carer for. I think she had MS. But one of the interesting things throughout the podcast was how few people he'd know. He basically embraced living a quiet life. But on Good Friday in 2019, just after midnight, when he went outside to fix what he thought was a broken satellite dish, he was struck by a crossbow bolt. And the podcast describes it as a medieval-style execution. So the investigation sort of focuses on why. There was such a remote location. He didn't seem to be disliked by anybody. It was a very complex case for a part of the world where the police force didn't have these kind of murders very often. And it's really interesting how it unravels about who this man was, who he did know, and why would anyone want to kill him. I won't go through the final convictions and things because I think it will ruin the podcast. Yeah. But one of the things that was really interesting and sad throughout it was they interviewed his daughter throughout the podcast. And he had one daughter. His partner was his second partner, not the mother of the daughter. And she was a very thoughtful, she seemed very kind, and she spoke of this fellow in ways which suggested he was a very lovely man. And her complete dismay about why anyone would hurt her father was really very, very moving. I think it was interesting because crossbow murders don't happen very often. I'm still scarred by, we need to talk about Kevin, which I won't go into now, many years ago. And I think it was just really interesting, an interesting location, and the Welsh accent is so beautiful. Emma, what did you think?
I thought it was good. The plot line didn't go in the way that I thought it was going to go. That's why I said to Anne, let's not give any spoilers. It's 6 episodes, about 35 minutes each, so it's a good commute one for
Yeah, it
when
is.
you're going back and forward from work.
Yes.
There was only one interesting. There's a lot of interesting things, but I was mildly amused that there was. I think the narrator's mother actually knew one of the suspects, so that amused me.
Yes, small town.
So I don't know if that was why he ended up following him, though it seems like it could have been quite a big case over in Wales.
I think he said, so the guy that the main narrator is English, but the one that goes out and meets everybody is Welsh, and he said he was standing in his kitchen. He lives in the UK, in England now, I think, and he'd heard it, and it was where he grew up, so that's why he started being interested in it, because it was unheard of in this idyllic. People buy holiday houses on this place to kind of get away, and this is very unusual for this kind of crime to occur. Anyway,
good fast-moving podcast.
Yes,
doesn't labour. It just gets to the point, and there's enough twist and turns to keep you engaged.
And they're great narrators, because it really does evoke what the place looks like in my head. In fact, I want to go and do some more research. It sounds like quite a beautiful spot. Now, the next one is The Beast in Me, which I keep calling The Beast Within. It's an 8-episode psychological thriller on Netflix. Its story follows the author Aggie Wiggs, hard to say, played by Clare Danes, who is recovering from a tragic death of her son and has retreated from public life. That's not giving too much away, and I'm not going to give a lot away. She gets a new neighbour who ends up being a very wealthy real estate mogul, apparently very well known, named Niall Jarvis, played by Matthew Rhys, who I think is very good. And he moves in next door, and he too is retreating because he was a suspect in the disappearance of his former wife. I think the whole world's supposed to be suspicious of him. So when he moves in, it's a little bit of a scandal. Anyway, she's an author. She's looking for something. She's been trying to write a new book. She was writing it on Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and I think she was struggling to make it interesting enough and new enough for it to be a great bestseller. The story is that she's just come off the back of a bestseller. And she's struggling to write another bestseller. Anyway, I'm not going to go into much more. She does get to know the neighbour, and I think Clare Danes is amazing. I mean, it's funny, I had to Google how old she was, because they really do play down her looks. She's not wearing a lot of makeup in the thing, and she does look a bit older than I think she is. But I think she's very good at it, and so is Matthew Rhys, who plays the neighbour. It's the couple of interesting things to note is when you're watching the show, you'll see that a couple of high-profile executive producers, Conan O'Brien and Jodie Foster, pop up, which I noted in the first episode. Anyway, it only premiered on the 13th of November, so it's very new. I haven't finished it yet, but the reviews are kind of calling it top-tier TV and really good, and so far, I would agree with them. What do you think, Emma?
Well, I have finished it. Yes, it is very good TV, very high quality. I've just got to talk about Clare Danes. She has this grip on roles where she plays middle to upper class New York white women that are very intense and, shall I say, slightly neurotic or highly strung. One is Fleishman in Trouble, and the other one more recently is Full Circle. Both I highly recommend. Now, the other thing was I was doing some Googling about this, and someone was saying it's Clare Danes' chin is doing all the acting in it, and I can't. As soon as I read it, I couldn't unsee it. It's a very emotional role, but she does a good job. And the other thing is too, people are saying, isn't it great to see an American actress on screen who's not all kind of Botoxed up, and that's where we can see her great emotional range. Now, I just want to do a shout out to Brittany Snow, who has she's from Pitch Perfect, who we're great fans of that movie here, and she's gotten really moved across from that sort of comedy kind of it girl. I don't even know if she's an it girl. She's in a gorgeous looking cheerleader type girl, like sort of bimbo-esque kind of roles, to serious acting, and yes. I really think she hits her straps in this one as she plays his wife.
His current wife,
yes. Niall Jarvis.
No, you are right. I was very impressed, and I suddenly realised I recognised her. I hadn't quite worked out who she was, but now I know. No, very good, and again, another one that I would recommend.
Definitely. Now that's the end of the episode. You know the drill, everyone. Like the episode on Apple or wherever you're watching it, Apple, Spotify, or YouTube, and also follow us on our socials: Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.